This is a Parshat podcast brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study, and I'm your host, Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. Let's learn. Welcome back to our Breshit series. These are our heroes, where we're exploring with our guests a central figure from each parsha, asking them what is meaningful, inspiring, powerful, challenging, and thought-provoking about their behaviors. This week's Parsha podcast is sponsored in loving memory of Chaim Givati, Chaim ben Sarah v'Chai, by his family on his first yard site. I also just want to say that I personally knew Chaim, and he was a lovely man, and we miss him. For those of you who love listening weekly, sponsoring an episode is a wonderful way to show your gratitude for the high-level content we try and put out each week. Be in touch with me at podcast@matan.org.il or via the Matan office to sponsor our Shemot episodes. Parshat Vayechi chronicles Yaakov's preparation for death. These preparations open with his request from Yosef that he be buried in Canaan, continues with the blessings of his two sons, a scene which has the potential to end disastrously like Yaakov and Esau's blessing mix-up, but doesn't. Yaakov then calls all of his sons to deliver what is often called the testament of Yaakov, mostly blessings he bestows upon his children, with many hints to their future tribal realities. Yaakov dies, and mourning practices are observed, both according to Egyptian and Israelite traditions. After this, the brothers have their final interaction with Yosef, a painful moment that I'm sure we'll touch upon today. And then the Torah recounts that Yosef passes away at the age of 110. While tremendous effort was made to bring Yaakov back to Egypt, Yosef remains there in a coffin, but leaves instructions to remove his bones at the right time. Yosef knows that while leaving Israel as a nuclear family to bury Yaakov only required permission from Paro, uprooting the extended family was not the undertaking for now. That God would have to orchestrate for Am Yisrael. Dr. Elana Stein Hain, our guest for today, is the Rosh Beit Midrash and senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She is the author of Circumventing the Law, Rabbinic Perspectives on Loopholes in Legal Integrity, which we did a special episode for before last really nice. Pesach, which was great. And she is the co-host of Texting, a podcast that brings Torah into conversation with contemporary Jewish life, and gives a weekly Big Ideas Shir on Daf Yomi for the Hadran website and program called Din and Daf. She is living this year with her family in Jerusalem, which is why we get to have her in person for the first time. Great to have you here, Elana.
Great to be here. Really great to be here.
We've finally reached the end of Sefer Breshit. This has been a journey. I'll speak a little bit more about that journey sort of as we wind down our episode. But we get to the end. We want there to be some sort of closing of circles, of a coming full circle, of some sort of resolution. And I guess we'll sort of circle today around that idea. Like, is there going to be a resolution? How does the book of Breshit end when we also know that we are still in medias res? We're in the middle of the story. Yep. It's going to continue. So yeah, like what's your perspective on sort of the way that Breshit opens, closes?
Sure. So I see Yosef's entire story as a bookend to Kayin and Hevel, essentially. A actually pretty beautifully resolved bookend to Kayin and Hevel. And, it hits me, it doesn't actually only have to be the Kayin and Hevel story. You might notice a number of times at the end, right? Like actually Vayigash and Vayechi, where we talk about Pruruvu, that they were able to multiply in Mitzrayim. Yeah. And it reminds you subtly of God speaking to Adam and Chava, giving them a bracha of Pruruvu, right? Like there is an envelope structure here that I think is about more than terminology, but it's actually about the themes of Am Yisrael caring for each other, where at the beginning of the story in Breshit, Kayin and Hevel, that didn't work out in terms of caring for each other. And Yosef and his brothers, it looked like it wasn't going to work out at the beginning. And then I think Yosef in a certain way becomes the new Kayin, but does it right.
Ooh,
which, yeah.
Okay,
I think
we're going to have to unpack that.
I'd love to unpack it.
I just add one thing, which is that as you mentioned Puruvu, and of course that theme shows up right away in the beginning of Shemot. Because you have Ele Shemot B'nai Yisrael, which is almost repetition, almost exactly of the list of the descendants we have in Breshit. And then we have the, Vayirbu, Vayishritzu, which is, again, that that famous illusion, they're producing like as if they're swarms of flies, essentially.
Yeah.
And like here it's the familial level, and there it's what enables them to become a nation.
And there may be a connection between how annoyed Paro is about how much they are multiplying in the beginning of Shemot, and the fact that they're able to multiply at the end of Breshit, while everybody else is kind of experiencing famine and likely not multiplying. But I guess we'll get to that too.
So should we start with Kayin and Hevel?
Let's do it.
Let's go for it.
Okay, here's the theory.
Yeah.
Okay, Hevel, what's his job? How does he spend his time? Retzon, right? Takes care of the cattle. Kayin, Oved Adama. He's involved with agriculture. Okay. Beginning of Yosef and his brother's story, they're all Retzon, right? Amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds like he's kind of the Hevel figure. He's going to be, right?
Well, he's going
to get killed maybe.
Yes.
And he also goes to the Sadeh, which is where Kayin killed Hevel. But then he doesn't get killed. And I actually think that at the beginning of the story, there are some suggestions that actually Yosef is Kayin. I'll tell you the biggest one to me. He tells his brothers this dream that they are Ma'almim alumim basadeh. We're collecting our harvest. They're not farmers. Vine kama alumativa gam nitzava, and I'm going to be the best farmer of them all. They're not farmers, right? That already, I'm like, wait, no, Kayin's the farmer. Hevel's the roet son. His brothers remain roet son throughout the story. Remember, when they come to Egypt, he says, I want you to tell Paro that you are roet son because it's toavat mitzrayim. Maybe it's because Yosef knows that he's going to buy up all the land of people who have agriculture. Maybe it's because his brothers really are not farmers. But already we're now set up for the guy who farms and is really good at it, which, by the way, let's be honest, being a farmer has a lot more stability in a way than being a retzon. Retzon, you move around and you have to be on other people's lands. Look, the irony of Kayin is that he's navinad. That's the irony. If you're a farmer, you're not supposed to have to be navinad.
Right. His lifestyle was shifted.
And so Yosef, over and over again, we are told that he's a farmer. So, for example, think about even what he does in Potiphar's house. Where is he successful? He's not just successful in the bayit, he's successful in the sadeh, right? What's he doing in the sadeh? I'd imagine overlooking. He runs this whole situation in Mitzrayim when they have a famine, right? His brothers have to come to him to get food because he has food, right? I think that's why they bow to him. I think that's the moment. And so in a way, he's set up as not the Hevel figure who's going to get knocked down, but the Kayin figure who actually has the potential for more stability, more strength. And by the way, here's a cute one. You know, he buys up everybody's land. Vayiken. You can't hear Kayin. I mean, you have to hear Kayin. You have to hear Kayin, right? And here's a great one too. Paro's dreams. Who else could tell Paro that his dreams about the cows and his dreams about the shibolim are the same dream? A guy who both works with cattle and is a farmer and can say, these are the same dream. I know both of these, right? Like and then the question is, but why, right? What are we trying to do here? And to my mind, it's all about Hashomer Achi Anochi versus, of course, Et Achai Anochi Mevakesh. I'm looking for my brothers at the beginning, but more than that, at the end, they even say to him, we'll be avadim to you like everybody else. He says, no, God sent me here for something else. He actually is Shomer Echav. That is his job. He is looking after his brothers. So even though he has reason to be angry at them, he has reason to have real violent intentions towards them, he has means by which to do it, and he doesn't.
I have to bring in the pasuk, the most enigmatic pasuk of the Kayin story.
I'm ready.
Which I think in the context of your theory about Yosef makes more sense than by Kayin. Right? When pasuk in Perek Daled pasuk Vav, ויאמר השם אל קין, למה חרה לך ולמה נפלו פניך? הלא אם תיטיב שאת ואם לא תיטיב לפתח חטאת רובץ ואילך את שוקתו ואתה תמשול בו. In this pasuk, Hashem presents this decision to Kayin, which is it's a very enigmatic pasuk. There's multiple ways to read it, but when I'm thinking about this now through the prism of Yosef, meaning this is exactly what he's faced with when the brothers come down, okay? You can go down a really, really harsh path vis-a-vis your brothers, or you can either control yourself or control them. And we actually see Yosef kind of doing both.
Yes.
Meaning he goes down the path of something, I don't even know, I'm not sure if I'm going to call it sinful, but really, really harsh in the way he treats his brothers.
Yeah.
But he also ends up wielding power over them that does keep him as the Moshel, meaning it's not a negative, it doesn't end up being a negative piece. He ends up using it to be the one who supplies, the one who provides for. He's he's the breadwinner almost of the family. And so I think that that's such a fascinating reading. And I think that pasuk really presents us with that like internal space of Yosef of like, which one do I do? I'm actually going to do both. I'm going to struggle with both of those. And I have that real yetzer to really stick it to them for what they did to me. But he also ultimately will become the ultimate provider.
So here's the question though. Why does he make that choice? Does he make that choice because of his father? Which is what his brothers seem to think, because once his father's gone, they think it's all poof.
Yeah.
Does he make that choice because he's been Hevel and he knows what it is and he doesn't want to turn them into? Does he make that choice because he's just moved beyond the sibling rivalry in his life? He's had things that are so much more important than that sibling rivalry in terms of obstacles that he's ever, right? Like what allows him to be that bigger person? And we don't know. But that is a curious thing to me, right? Because he struggles with it and he ends up being the bigger person. What allows him to do that?
I mean, if I'm just looking at the psukim, I think that it's his faith perspective, meaning I don't think it's lip service, what Yosef says multiple times throughout the story, right? He says, Atachat Elokim ani.
Right.
Like, I think that ultimately what pushes him down from that, I mean, physically he has a pedestal, right? But meaning what pushes him down and keeps him subdued and doesn't do the ultimate of like not provide for them or even kill them, I think is that faith orientation that like I don't rule here. I'm a little bit thinking, let's say even just I'm teaching in a different context. I'm thinking about Yeshayahu for a moment. Yeshayahu has a very unique perspective where he basically thinks that all sin emanates from an idea, emanates from a character trait of gava. That when people think that they are more than they are, that's what causes them to worship avodah zarah, to not think that Hashem is at the center, to do horrible social ills, is because you think that you're better than other people. You don't see a God above you in that same way. It's a very unique perspective. No one else speaks about ge'on in the way that Yeshayahu does. And I feel like that is a trait that Yosef adopts here. He adopts this trait. He has a humility. He knows exactly how powerful he is. He knows the people over whom he rules, but he has like this stop mark, like above, like ad kan.
But that's a great envelope too, because what precipitates Kayin's murder of Hevel? His thought that, hey, how come God rejected me?
Yeah.
And then Yosef says, what's true Yirat Shamayim? It's not saying, obviously God rejected me because I ended up in the Sohar and I ended up, before that being accused by it, and before that being sold to the Ishmaelim. No, God is still in control. I have to recognize that. I have to keep my humility. This is not payback time. So that's a beautiful envelope structure of what is our relationship with God supposed to do for who we are in our lives. What does Yirat Shamayim actually mean? That's beautiful.
I think, and then we're developing this now as we speak, but I think that I imagine like the image of like, it puts a roof over your head in the sense that like it gives you a limit. And I think that limit is also what we see reflected in this pasuk, meaning that we mentioned earlier, meaning you have a choice, but ultimately you have to know, where your power can reach and where it can't reach.
It's interesting because I want to say that actually sometimes people do start to recognize God in particular when they see the bad behavior of people around them. And that it's actually sort of like there must be someone who sees all of this and is aware of how problematic it is, because otherwise, what's the recourse? So it's interesting to consider that there are people for whom a faith orientation is too difficult, and there are people for whom a faith orientation is the only thing that makes sense to them.
Right. There needs to be something that's holding all of this together.
Yes.
Like otherwise, because it's beyond my ability to hold space for all that.
Because look at what happens in the human world. Like there's so there are a lot of layers, obviously, but I do think it's interesting to consider if you had a different Yosef had a different trajectory in his life, would he have ended up being that model of always saying, God is the one who's going to interpret the dreams. Right. I don't know. His brothers don't emerge like that.
Right.
So also something to think about. Gam v'gam.
Right. Something about Dafka, him being left alone, thrown in pits, having so many difficulties in his life. For other people they would be buried underneath that. But part of what makes Yosef, I think, really be so transcendent is because he's able to transcend that situation and come out with this faith orientation. And
it worked out. Right? Meaning you can have great faith orientation and you stay in the gulag and you never get out. Right. And it's a little bit like, okay, that's between you and God. Right. But it's not, that's not a story that we're necessarily going to tell people as like, that's the story. Yes. Right? But this is the story for precisely that reason. I love that you went back to Perek Daled of you have a choice to make now. Make the right choice, even if you struggle to get there.
By the way, I think it's even more of a bookend than the Kayin and Hevel story, because I think that it's a bookend also back to the first relationship between man and God. Like I think that there's almost a repair that Yosef, I'm taking your idea, but Yosef
I'm so excited about this. Yeah. This is why you learn with other people. Exactly. I love this.
So Yosef is creating a relationship that Adam was not able to capitalize on, meaning he evaded that connection with God and behaved the way he did and then hid because he was in fact ashamed of what he did. And we end with a Yosef who invites God into his life, right? There isn't the direct presence, and he invites God into his life and creates that orientation for himself.
And then of course you have to look at the pasuk before the destruction of Sodom. That Sodom is Kigan Hashem Ke'eretz Mitzrayim.
Exactly.
Like Gan Eden, like Egypt. Amazing. So here we have a new Garden of Eden where people are providing food, even though there's no food, but God is still at the center for Yosef. You have proof, like you have in some ways, and this is why I think the envelope structure actually prepares us for Shemot, because you have throughout Breshit this question of, are we as a people going to care for each other? And the answer keeps being no. No, we're not. No, we're not. You've talked about sibling rivalry for the last, 10 weeks? Yeah. Right? Like, that's what it is. Yosef says, let's nip this in the bud, guys. We're going to be an Am. We're going to be a nation. And then Shemot starts, and guess what? Everybody starts noticing that the Jewish people are an Am.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, why are you all taking care of each other? What about us? Why are you not taking care of us? And of course, they forget that Yosef did take care of them very much, right? But it sets the stage for the story of a nation.
Yeah, right. That really the traits that we need to build something broader. And this is, I've said this definitely in many episodes in the past, but it's always worth repeating, that it has to be at these positive traits in achva, not an agreement. They don't necessarily want to live next to each other, but these traits need to be at the root of the family structure so that then they can grow exponentially on the national structure.
It's really this simple.
Yeah.
Nobody is an eved to anybody else. That's what they say to their brother. They say, take us as avadim. Take us as avadim. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I'm not your master. You're not my master. That's the bare minimum. Right. We take care of each other, not because we're in a master-slave relationship. It's not just a transactional thing, but because we're family.
I think also the master-slave, obviously you're drawing from the story that's kind of come after of our master-slave relationship in Egypt. But I think also we have to remember that it continually uproots, subverts the the trope that they are living alongside, which is that there always has to be a ruler in the family. That is the culture.
Yeah.
And the Torah continually, and it has some back and forth sometimes, because we do have halachot of the Bechor, but like the whole Sefer Bereshit can just continuously subverts that idea and says, nope, there will be natural leaders in a family, but they have to be a natural leader because of their character traits. Doesn't really have to do with their place of birth. But the figures and the stories are still struggling with that societal expectation. And each time each generation, they have to sort of like uproot that idea. But as you're saying so beautifully, it then also, if within a family there's the Rav and Seir, then within a nation there's going to be the master and the slave. And so both the familial hierarchy and the national hierarchy, we overturn the familial one in Sefer Bereshit, and then we overturn the national hierarchy in...
Or really the international.
Right? The international hierarchy in the beginning of Sefer Shemot.
Right? It's a little bit like, and I think about the state of Israel like this, right? The state of Israel is the Jew of the nations, right?
Yes.
It is. Meaning the Jews in, I'm going to go with a very Ashkenazic story.
Yeah.
The Jews in Europe wanted to solve the Jewish question. They thought the Jewish question was, how do people behave towards us as individuals? Nope. Turns out the Jewish question is, we as a conglomerate, as a collective, we are the Jew of the nations. How are people going to look at us? I think in some ways, that's the move from Breshit to Shemot. In Breshit, we're trying to figure out how do we make ourselves into something from individual. And then in Shemot, we're like, holy cow, other people are looking at us and they have a relationship to us as a nation.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And it looks like master-slave. Not good, right?
Yeah.
But let's just be real. Let's make a little pivot, okay? Dr. Uriel Simon, okay? When I saw this, I think my friend Dr. Michal Biton pointed this out to me, and I was like, this is amazing. He says, he's like, and I don't know if I'm getting all the details right of what exactly he says, but he asked the question as to if it is possible that some of the anger of the beginning of Shemot at the Jews relates directly to what's happening at the end of Breshit. And I'll give some examples, right? I mentioned before that we have a specific pasuk, right? It's the pasuk right before Vayechi, right? It's Perek Mem Zayin, pasuk Kaf Zayin, Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, Vayeachazuva, Vayifru, Vayirbu me'od, right? Everybody else is giving their land to Yosef. They have no achuzah. Everybody else, I bet you they're not having 1 million kids. But the Jews are living fine in Goshen, right? Yosef makes everybody into his avadim. Eventually, they sell themselves. Ultimately, the Jewish people become avadim. The question that this brings up is it inevitable that when Jews take care of each other and are as particularistic as we are meant to be, that it raises the ire of others against us?
If we succeed.
If we succeed. If we succeed, right? I think this is a very important question. And I was learning this with a few people a few weeks ago, and somebody came up to me and they said, maybe we have to ask a second question, right? The first question is it inevitable? The second question is, if it's not inevitable, was there any way that Yosef could have done things differently so that it wouldn't have raised that ire? Or again, is it inevitable, right? And I think that is really heart-pounding in a certain way. I also saw years ago, everybody's trying to figure out what happens at the beginning of Shemot. What things were going so well, like what happened, right? And I remember years ago, Dr. Brachi Elitzur, I was reading a piece of hers, maybe on Herzog's website. I don't remember. I love her stuff. I just want to put a plug. Dr. Brachi Elitzur.
Yeah.
Look for everything she writes on Tanakh. She's amazing.
Yeah, I work with her in Herzog. She's wonderful.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
I've never met her as a person, but I have met her ideas. And I'm like, amazing. So she mentioned, she's like, how come Paro sends such an entourage when Yosef goes to bury his father? Yosef didn't ask for an entourage.
Yeah.
She said, I think he's afraid Yosef's not going to come back, right? Like, maybe you're not really loyal. Or the Book of Jubilees, right? Second Temple period stuff. Not Bible stuff, but written by a Jew. Book of Jubilees suggests that when they go to bury Yaakov, The big problem is there's actually a war at that time between Egypt and the Canaanites, and it doesn't look good that the Jews want to go bury in Canaan. Whose team are they really on? So like everybody's trying to figure out how this fifth column stuff happened.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of wondering if it's possible that what happened is we just took care of each other, and Yosef took care of everybody else also, but in a different way than his own family. And that ultimately, as soon as Paro's gone, the resentment builds, and here we are.
The question of the morality of what Yosef does to Mitzrayim, I think, stands on its own. Not that it's disconnected.
Right, like should he have bought up all their stuff?
It's a question. Like, was
Okay,
that
fair.
the best solution? It rings a little bit harshly in our ear because of what is going to happen in the future. And it literally says that they are le'avadim. Right. And so we have this question. Is it Yosef utilizing the kind of power-wielding system that is native to Egypt? Is he capitalizing on it? Did he create this sort of sharecropping system? We don't know. And I've read a lot on like the ancient history to try and understand it. Wow. It seems like he's wielding ideas that were there. I don't think he created sharecropping, but it does. We, through both our biblical stories,
we created the cherry tomato and sharecropping.
Exactly.
No, just stick with it.
And drip irrigation.
With the cherry tomato and drip irrigation, please.
and ways.
Jews did not create sharecropping. Quote me in any context on that,
exactly.
Please.
So I think that we feel uncomfortable with it because as a nation, we never see anywhere where we are supposed to have power over others. The Torah warns against this in so many places. We're meant to be powerful in our own, over our own, but we're not an empire. Ayin Sham, a lot of political theorists, Ayin Sham.
We don't want to be
Rabbi
an empire.
Sachs for Am Yisrael also has written about that. We don't want to be an empire. So I think
Egypt,
that Yosef's
Babylonia,
behavior,
Rome. We don't want to be an empire.
It feels very much like the behavior of non-Israelites.
Wow.
But I think that to look at that and say, is this why they then hated us in Shemot? Is to then go and internalize the anti-Semitic behaviors of others and be overly critical of ourselves. Meaning, I'm not sure. I agree with you that on a literary level, there is something here that's very powerful. And there's something here that when you learn those stories, honestly, it feels challenging. You're saying, what is Yosef doing? But I think, and there is something very jarring about the population of Israelites being really flourishing and doing well and having their food and being taken care of by the leader. But to go from there to say that then over time the Egyptians hate us because we're doing well, to me is to imbibe external hate.
So let's
challenge me on that.
Do something different. Let's make it into more incremental steps. Ready?
Yeah.
Jews become very successful in America. The more successful we are, the more some people love us.
Yeah.
Because they're going to work with us and it's going to be great. The more successful we are, other people hate us. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that I'm blaming Jews for people hating them. It means if we see in Kayin and Hevel a situation where jealousy, resentment leads to attempted homicide, we may be seeing that on a national level, an inter-nation level at the beginning of Shemot, where resentment and jealousy leads to attempted homicide. Now, the question to me is that simply inevitable?
Right.
And it's possible that it is. And that doesn't necessarily mean Yosef should have done anything different with his brothers. And as you say, there is a question independently as to whether he was treating the Egyptians right compared to his brothers. And if you overlay those things and simply blame him for anti-Semitism, I think we're making a mistake.
Yeah.
Because people make choices, right? La petach chatat rovetz. People make choices. But I think the particularism question for the Jewish people has always been between these two poles.
Yeah.
We must look out for each other. That is who we are. People may be naturally angry, resentful, accuse us of dual loyalty or disloyalty. And we also are constantly for ourselves from an ethical perspective, asking ourselves, how are we both people of our people and people of the world?
Yeah.
Right?
I think also the physical separation is in Goshen is an interesting piece of this conversation. Throughout history, early Second Temple period and beyond, the first anti-Semitic tropes were based on the fact that we didn't eat with other people, that we had our own customs. And that was even when we were living alongside other people. So I don't want to overemphasize the physical separation, but both the physical separation and I'm sure a different way of living, I think do naturally sort of attract they naturally attract a hate.
People don't like difference.
Exactly.
They don't like
look
difference.
at it as an elitism as opposed to these are our customs. And from there, it's sort of like an easy track to something much more vicious.
I just think there's a lot to talk about, meaning Yosef was the bridge. Yosef's paro was the bridge.
Yeah.
And once they're both gone, the bridge is out.
Right. And then it's just two peoples that are so separate that then to find a way to connect is very difficult. I think that's the really, as you're saying, it's a significant role, and obviously it's a model of a kind of role that we can be, meaning to be the Yehudi b'chatzer, right? To be the court Jew, which is essentially what Yosef is. I spoke about that at Parshat Vayechi. But to be that court Jew is significant because it creates a powerful, maybe benevolent and influential Jewish face in the broader world.
Yes.
And as you're saying, that question doesn't disappear just because of the state of Israel. It actually makes it even stronger, right?
Correct.
Because we have created Goshen. Okay, we've created Goshen in this full sense, but it actually amplifies what we've discovered, this question of we can't just run away from it. The question will run after us.
Nachon.
Yeah,
and by the way,
Elana.
Here's a thing, and I know we're going to wrap up in a second. Here's something to consider. Is it possible that the Kayin and Hevel challenge now becomes the Mitzrayim versus Yisrael challenge? Where Mitzrayim has a choice. Okay, so these people, they're Puravu, they have a choice. What are you going to do now? And what do they decide to do? Put them in the Sadeh and kill them essentially with work, right? And God says, no, this is not it's not supposed to be master-slave. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here, right? That's one thing. And the second thing I would say is what's powerful about Yosef is that you can have the experience of being the victim and the experience of being the strong one at the same time. And I think that in Israel, one of the things that is so hard is what does it look like to feel and be victimized and have strength at the same time? It's a little crazy making because it would be so much easier to just be one or the other. And that's why I think Yosef is an amazing degem for right now. And it's hard, but I hope that it's inspiring to us. That this is our story from the beginning.
Wow, Elana. Thank you for that. Mamash. I feel like it's a fresh prism, and I think it's a prism that really emerges from the way that the text is presenting, and I think that I've missed it until this conversation, so thanks.
I am so excited to see what you're going to do with it. So incredibly excited. Thank you for letting me share it.
Thank you for coming. I want to end today's conversation with a little bit of a summary of our series, and I also have an announcement. So if anybody's thinking of skipping this end, just wait because I have an exciting announcement to make as well. Each time I begin a book anew, and we'll be beginning Shemot for the 4th time next week on this podcast. Yes, I am concerned that the conversations will cycle, that they'll repeat ideas. And I'm amazed anew each time that this is not what happens. Not only is there so much to focus on in each parsha, But the range of guests, new and returning, and I have some really new, really interesting guests also coming on for the next series, always keeps the wheels of thought and experience moving and diversifying. So that's a real gift. In this series on Breshit, we created several portraits of biblical figures using our classic commentators, biblical scholarship, and modern ideas that we imported into the Torah world to shed light on the stories. The book of Breshit recounts stories surrounding, on the one hand, common family dynamic issues, coupled with a world of very different norms, but also with an awareness of their covenantal roles. There are many hiccups in this foundational stage, as there will be in the next one, in the nation-forming stage. The episodes over the last few months, and also the one we just had right now, also has reflected, sometimes subtly and sometimes less so, the reality in Israel as it has developed. There were weeks when creating these episodes was an escape from the bleak daily news, and weeks where those realities deeply impacted the content that was created. The relationship between the two has been dynamic over the past year and a half, and I'm sure it will continue to be in the coming months. Before we say goodbye, I want to tell you about a really exciting event coming up. In order to celebrate our 200th podcast episode, we'll be holding a really special evening on Motzei Shabbat, January 18th at Meshek 48 in Kibbutz Rosh Tzurim in Gush Etzion. If you're a podcast fan and that location is accessible to you, please join me along with Dr. Yael Ziegler and Devorah Levine-Katz for a moving live conversation, which we've titled Profiles of Courage, where we will discuss both through the Torah lens of the early chapters of Shemot, which is what coincides with that weekend, as well as reflecting on our own experiences over the past year, what it means to be courageous, and what strengths we have discovered in ourselves and in others over the past year and a half. The conversation will hopefully capture the curious, heartfelt, and Torah-themed vibe of the podcast to create an inspiring evening. You can sign up for the event on the Matan website. Lastly, our Shemot series will be focusing on first principles of nationhood. What axiomatic ideas sit at the root of Israel's national formation, without which we wouldn't be who we are? How might we adjust our current trends in the Jewish world to realign with some of these principles? Those are going to be the guiding questions of the next series. This series, like the Torah narrative, will shift away from discussions of family and focus on questions of national significance, which I think is great because we just ended with something like that, even though that wasn't planned. A dimension.
No, it was planned. It was Remember, planned. Just how we planned.
It was planned. Focusing on questions of national significance, a dimension of our collective lives that has experienced upheaval and significant change in the past year and a half. Join me for those conversations with new and returning podcast guests. Elana, again, thanks for being here.
What a joy.
And thanks for completing Sefer Breshit. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek.
Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Bezrat Hashem. We really should nit chazek.
Amen. Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.